Namaste. So, Satsang is for anyone and everyone that wants to experience the truth of their real being, and perhaps more importantly, to come to live from that place of truth in an effortless and continuous way, so that it is habitual. And because of that, we all meet to go deeper into this seeing of what we are. We have all had many, many lifetimes of feeling ourselves to be a separate being. That seemingly separate being has been through many, many experiences and picked up many ideas about itself along the way. And just because we might have seen how we really are in our true nature doesn't mean that those beliefs automatically fall away. Sometimes they do. And that is the stereotypical myth of awakening, isn't it? That there is one big seeing and then poof, everything falls away and you're just happy and peaceful and free for the rest of eternity. For most of us, it isn't really like that. For most of us, for myself, it was much more of a gradual thing. And that's really what I wanted to bring attention to today. And I was going to speak about that. And then we got these couple of questions emailed in that really, really speak to that, of course. Perfect timing, the universe delivers. So I want to go through, I've got two questions to read out on email, and then I'll open up for general questions live today. And I see we have one hand up already, so you will be first in the queue. But I want to start with these two first that have been emailed in because they are just absolutely spot on. The first one says, "Hello, Helen. Your wisdom and kindness have kept me returning to your satsangs, both present and previous ones. You are so appreciated. I heard you talk about your past, and it brings tears to my eyes because it sounds like my present. I'm 50 now, and although I have had brief periods of lightness in my life, it's mostly been spent fretting about the future and feeling permanently defined by the past. Although I externally have a normal life, and I think people see me as a happy and friendly person who has done something with his life, I have a deep lack of confidence and almost always feel a quiet basement level alarm in my being, whispering that something needs to be fixed and that I'm different from other people and somehow unsafe. I thought I could make myself more comfortable in the present moment by meditating, so I've done it fairly intensively over the past 3 years, an hour or two a day. It's life-changing in many ways, mainly increase mindfulness and compassion for others. I still have trouble with genuine compassion towards myself, though. It's like the voice in my head holds me to an impossibly high standard, a standard that I don't expect from others. How do I love myself more and let myself off the hook of this never-ending and never satisfied ego? Thank you. So this question comes from obviously one particular being, but it could be anybody's question, couldn't it? And it's probably everybody's question, because in my own journey, it was so much easier to love everyone else than to love my own self. And making that jump from, it was obvious how my mind saw myself, how my egoic sense of self thought about who I was. And that was very, very persistent. And making that jump from judging myself and blaming myself and feeling unworthy and all of that to loving unconditionally and accepting how I am right now in this moment is how I'm supposed to be, was challenging to say the best. So it's a really important subject, isn't it? It's everyone's question. And this basement level alarm that you've spoken about in your question, it was just a it's a really good way to describe it. For me, there was this constant dread. The sky was about to fall. There was just something wrong. There was just this feeling something is wrong. And also, as you said here, something is wrong with me too. There's something fundamentally wrong. I am too different from other people. And this feeling that I hear a lot of people describe, that who I project myself to be, who you would get to meet if we went for a coffee, is acceptable, fits in with everybody's expected projections. But if you really got to know me, you wouldn't like me. Something like that inside all of us, that this deep projection of self. So how do I love myself more? And how do I let myself off the hook of this never satisfied ego? Well, we have to begin to be that love right now. We can begin to be that love as much as we're capable of in this moment. And it really helps to look at the difference between the judgment and the love that we are wanting for ourselves. Judgment and blame and feeling that there's something wrong with us, all of that is based on assumptions about ourselves. So I think I know how I am, and therefore all of my desires and judgments and blaming of myself are based on how I think I am. That's what our egoic sense of self is. It's a bunch of assumptions that we keep looking for evidence for and therefore keep finding, because we're not really a separate being. We're really the infinite being, all there is. And with that comes infinite power. And when we really insist on seeing evidence that we're not good enough, then we keep seeing it over and over again. Also, while that is going on, without even having transcended that can still be going on, we can choose also as a second response. Our first response may always be to judge ourselves or blame something or feel that we're doing it wrong or that nobody accepts us or likes us, all of that. But we can begin to work on a second response. So the second response may be to be more open to see. Is there another way to see yourself that you haven't currently experienced? Is there another way to see the manifestation of you that you aren't currently recognizing? So cultivating openness as well. Not making our egoic sense of self wrong. We don't need to push against it. What would love do in this situation? We know what ego would say in this situation, what it would do. But what would love do also? Can we begin to get more interested in that? Love, the self, the noumenon, the word I use for self, awareness, beingness, presence, consciousness, the knower, all of these, the same words, the same thing. How would that real self that I am treat this situation? How would it see it? And we're so good. We really wanted to see what it is, that it's silent, that it's still, that it's not moving, it's not changing, that it is eternal, it's unlimited, it doesn't have any edges, all of that. But we can begin then to bring our attention to how does it respond to our ego? How does it respond to thoughts? What does it do with emotions? What does it do when some karmic pattern plays? And we can choose to also be more like that, to literally step into being like that too, even while the judgment is going on, the blaming is going on of our own self. Ego has impossibly high standards that we can never meet. Why? Because it is a mechanism that functions in duality. It's a mechanism, a software program to help your body grow up into adolescence and adulthood, to discern and to evaluate and to compare. It takes two things, ego, and tries to compare them. And it's always looking for good and bad, which then it says is wanted and not wanted. So it compares two things. That's all it can do. It doesn't have any capacity to do otherwise. And therefore, it is always going to be comparing. So it will be comparing how you are right now in this moment with how it thinks you should be. And again, how it thinks you should be and how it sees you in this moment is based on what it thinks is true, a bunch of assumptions. So ego thinks it knows who you are, and then it has this imaginary picture of you in the future, both of which are built on assumptions or lies that are not really true about you. So you can never fulfill its expectations. You can never reach that place where you feel good enough, where you feel adequate, where you feel awakened enough if we keep perceiving through ego. Why? Because we're trying to recognize the one being that we are right here in this manifestation as you, as your particular mind and body through a mechanism that sees and compares two things. Is that ever going to work? Not so much, is it? And even if you somehow manage to live up to this imaginary image that you have of yourself, you know, what this self-portrait I have of myself, that when I get to this point, I'll like and love myself. Immediately there'd be something else. Ego would have to project more. Okay, you need more of this now. You would never be satisfied, as you said here. So just understanding the difference between what love would do and what ego would do, that they're two different modes you can experience yourself through. Love wants to, the self wants to understand. It wants to understand why something works. And I remember as a small child watching my granddad, he used to have this really old car. And every now and again, he never drove it anywhere, but he would just take apart the engine piece by piece. And I'd watch him doing this over and over again. He'd put it back together again. And he'd just be so happy doing this. And of course, none of us really understood what he was doing. Why just take it apart and put it back together again? Why do this thing over and over again? So I finally asked him one day and said, you don't ever drive the car? Don't you want to take it out once you've put it back together? And he just said, I just love taking things apart to see how they work. And there was I didn't get the significance of that at the time. When I really began to wake up, I really recognized this is what we need to begin to do with our egoic sense of self. This is what love would want to do, wouldn't it? It would want to open up and experience, why is ego the way it is? Can it really see the truth? Can it really see the one being? What are its limitations, ego? What is it even capable of achieving what it wants to achieve? All from a place without blame, just actually wanting to see what is it that sustains my egoic sense of self? And is there also another way to perceive myself? So as you begin to see that the reason we can have more compassion for other beings than ourselves is usually because we don't have so many portraits in our head about them, projections in our head about them. It's easier to accept someone else as they are right now in this moment through ego. But even then, ego's probably comparing yourself to that other being. Well, they seem to be further ahead than you. They don't seem to be struggling as much as you are, etc. And on it goes. Can we really use this mechanism of ego to perceive what we actually are? Of course, we can't with the formlessness, because you can't see empty, vast, spacious nothingness with your senses and your mind. You can only see it directly. Awareness can see awareness. But then when we look at our mind and body, the first arising, our life, our individuality, our friendships, our relationships, our pathway to awakening, all of it, we automatically switch back to perceiving through ego. So then cultivating this habit to want to understand, why isn't it working? Why is it never ending? Why aren't I reaching peace through this mechanism? And is it possible, actually? So love wants to understand. Love wants to take apart the ego to see how it works. Not in a forceful way. It wants to get in there with a spanner and really have a look and see. And it's the opposite, isn't it, of judgment? It's the opposite of assumption. It's the opposite of what ego does, which is to compare two things. Let me look at this thing as it actually is, and how many of us really look at our ego with these loving eyes. If we wait for ego to stop doing what it does, it will never, ever end. If, as well as that egoic thing going on that we all do to ourselves, we could begin to cultivate, why is this happening? Why does ego feel so sure of this? Why does it always hold me to a high standard? When I really began to do this in myself, it began to become clearer and clearer that I'd been expecting ego to do something it's not capable of doing. I've been asking my egoic sense of self to look at my body mind that are always changing and growing and all of that, and to see the essence of it underneath, the perfection that's already there. And it's not capable of, because you can only compare here, where it thinks you are, with where it thinks you need to be, which is not at all where you actually are and where you actually will be. They're two different things. So understanding ego's limitations, wanting to really understand it, stop treating it, all of us treat it like the enemy, like it just needs to be somehow eliminated, killed or squashed or destroyed or something. And I tried that for a very long time and it didn't work, and probably having the same experience right now. So let's try to see if we can come to want to understand this mechanism. Yes, it causes us suffering, but the most suffering that we'll ever experience is by treating ego how ego would treat it. The self, the silence, the presence, the consciousness, the witness. It is just watching, just listening, just allowing unconditionally the ego to do its thing. And it says both perspectives are valid. I can be judging myself and I can be loving myself at the same time. Which one takes precedence is which one I cultivate more. And as I choose to love my ego, it will literally melt. It's held together by a bunch of assumptions and the pushing against it that we all do. We're all saying quite violently in our energy, you should not be here. You're here, but you should not be here, to our ego, to our mind. And your word is law because you are the infinite being. Whatever you say and mean with your energy, you're going to keep experiencing. So when we energetically say, I understand, ego, why you feel this way, but I don't necessarily have to agree with you. It's fine if you're here or not, and I'll only suffer if I'm pushing against you. Then it begins to melt. When we say, you should not be here, you are the cause of my suffering, then we're sustaining it in that. How to love it then, to want to understand, to want to really come to see why it works the way it does. Take it apart with a spanner. You don't have to, this is one thing you don't have to put back together again when you're finished. Oh, you can if you want to, but you'll probably find you don't want to. And just give it some love. It's doing the best it can, and somehow Your egoic sense of self has got this crazy idea that it's responsible for your awakening, and it can't fully achieve that. The best it can do is compare itself with the self and conclude that they're two, and they're not really. That's as far as it can take you there through no fault of its own. So I hope that's given you some way to move forward this question. Just don't wait for the judgment to stop before you start loving yourself. Do it anyway. How would the self see me? How would the silence see these thoughts? How would an awakened being see my egoic sense of self, my problems, my fears, all of that? You can step into that right now, can't you? Even if you have no clue of the answers to those questions I've just said, just wanting to see is enough. You begin to. Most of us spend so much energy pushing against our egoic judgment of ourselves, waiting for it to go before we begin to love and understand it. And it's never, ever going to work that way. So, so I'll go to the second question. Dear Helen, many thanks for your satsangs. Who am I? Where am I? And is this true? Our core teachings you have shared. Is this true? May pertain to something I may believe about myself, usually along the lines of I'm not worthy, and experiences recur until what may be a deep-seated conviction is removed. And so experiences pertaining to that particular issue stops and others surface. But does not one's belief about oneself being bad or not worthy, etc., have its foundations in the primary belief that this illusory world is real, and therefore that this body-mind is real? Ergo, if body-mind is believed to be real, then beliefs about that body-mind are able to come into existence. So when one begins to abide and deepen into awareness or self, and the world is seen as unreal and a waking dream, then would not these experiences pertaining to one's beliefs about oneself not occur, or have no holding power if they did? Many thanks. Well, the short answer to that is yes. The moment I come to see that I've never been a separate being, that I am infinite and everywhere, there is nothing outside of me, separate to me, different to me, to hurt me, threaten me, harm me, that my existence can never come to an end, that I can take the shape of form or formless, then simultaneously all of my karmic patterns, beliefs about myself are null and void. And some beings experience it that way. That seeing is so powerful that it just blasts everything else out of the water. I can't believe I'm unworthy as a being if I have deeply, deeply seen that I am the self, the source of all things. But for most beings, it's a gradual process. It was for myself. And really, what we're talking about here are two things that look different but are the same thing, meaning if I clearer and clearer see every time I self-inquire, every time I meditate, I experience myself to be the formless ground of being from which all things are arising and changing, and that I'm not subject to birth, life, death, all of that, then it's going to be easier and easier to move beyond these thoughts. And at the same time, I'm also beginning to break down these beliefs that are still functioning out of habit by contemplating, questioning, looking, is it really true? And actually, they are both the same thing. One is two sides of a coin. One is getting clearer and clearer on what I actually am. And the other is getting clearer and clearer on what I've never really been, but thought I was. And so occasionally there is the odd being that has this apocalyptic boom, where the one seeing is powerful enough that it completely obliterates all capacity to believe any thought. But for most of us, that is a gradual process, punctuated with many, many little seeings that get bigger and bigger, and then eventually accumulate into You've seen so clearly what you are, and you've also seen so clearly that you never were unworthy or unsafe or any of those things, that it begins to, they're both the same thing. We're working for two sides of a coin that are really the same, aren't they? The more you see what you are, the clearer it is what you've never really been. The more you know you've never really been that, the clearer it is what you've always been. So they feed into each other in a beautiful way. And the analogy we've used before is like rowing a boat. If you're only rowing with one oar, seeing what I am, you're going to go around in circles. If you're only trying to dissolve these karmic patterns and releasing them, you're going to be going around in circles this way. If you're rowing with both oars, or in reality, it's more like I row, I do a little self-inquiry, I see clearer, and then a belief comes up after my seeing to contemplate. So I row with this oar, and then this one, and then this one. You're going to be moving forward into a deeply embodied awakening. And eventually, yes, they have no holding power, and then they stop occurring, these beliefs. So I hope that helps. It's very rarely like it's advertised, or the ones that we remember, the great beings like Ramana, who had this, just suddenly decided to lie down and see what it's like to die. Most of us, I certainly wasn't that mature. It took me a good long while to really face my fear and question if it's true that I could ever cease to exist. Okay, so lovely. Okay, so we'll go to the questions. Is it Shaista? Whenever you're ready.
Hello, hi.
Hi,
How are you?
I'm very well, thank you. Nice to meet you. How are you?
Nice to meet you too. Yes, I'm fine, thank you.
Good.
Uh, I just met you, through a friend like 2, 3 days ago, and over the YouTube, and it was. I'm so glad I got you, and I've been listening to your YouTube and all, and the journey you had. I think mine was quite similar also. I've been with Ramana and Maharaj for a long time, over 10 plus years, and then with Muji for a while, attending its satsangs and all that. And the journey has been gradual
Yeah.
and all. But now I think with the recently, in a few years, and now more so these days, as if it's just pushing me like to an extent. It's that I don't have much of a choice. Is I'm not being very impatient, but at the same time, it's the interest is on this side so much. Last night I was listening to your video on love, the redemption of love, like when you went to Adya Shanti and all, and
Mm-hmm.
it was so beautiful. It was just so overwhelming to know and to see all that, your experience. And something similar happened to me a few days ago. For the very first time, if it would shoot it was so, I mean, it's just saying that last week I talked to Ramana. He's on my phone and my wall everywhere. Like, so I just talked to him because I feel I have no living teacher and I have no like who to go to. And I come from the Islamic tradition and it's a completely different tradition. So I was looking into his eyes. I just did that when you said that in the video. I'm like, I did that last week and I asked him to, help me. And I
Yeah.
was looking into his eyes and it kept bringing the phone closer and all. And you said the same thing. So I was like, it's quite similar anyhow. So what really happened last week, my I have children, like I have teenagers children, and they have had health conditions since childhood, and but not much. But like last week or so, the the health conditions becoming more and more and more, and they have a diagnosis which is genetic. They said it's a genetic health condition. It's quite chronic, and going forward they'll have tests. We don't know what to expect, and that brought so much fear in me, so much fear and love and attachment and all that.
Right, Mira.
And it just took me to the other side. Like, uh, I can't see you anymore. I don't know. Can you hear
Sorry.
me?
Yep, I'm still here. Somebody accidentally unmuted themselves. It's okay.
Yeah. So no, so last week when I heard that my children have this condition and it could go either way, it could go really bad, it could go
Mhm.
this way. It's a genetical, very very rare condition. The love. and the fear and the love and everything came so much, it just pushed me here. And I guess I don't know what my question is, but what I, for the very first time, I experienced some. I mean, I had a little bit of trickling over the years. I've been experiencing many awakenings, little one, big ones, in the presence of Moji, and otherwise also. Then, you know, because I, I'm with myself for many years, and I've been doing what I'm doing. So when I realized that I'm not 100% sure this is why the question probably is. So when the fear was so much, and I just started to give in. I had no choice but, you know,
Yeah.
just give in to this fear, because I've had this fear all my life within me, but this was so intense
Yeah.
because the fear was of losing my children, and of future, and of, you know, whatever, or maybe, you know, what the life will be, and there's nothing in my control. So I think control went all of a sudden.
Yeah.
And
Yeah, and
when
that's
it did,
something that happens, isn't it? When something like that happens in our worldly experience that we seem to have absolutely no control over, you know, that it's going to be one of those moments where either there's an intense amount of fear or usually anger or both, you know, and a real sense of losing control. We're suddenly confronted with that, aren't we?
yeah, and I think it happened by itself because I just had moved myself. So I gave in for a while, and I experienced this love. As you explained, the love wasn't for anybody. The love, it was just compassion. I don't know, for everyone. I can't say it was for myself, but it was just peace, and
Mm.
this something. The people I had a lot of judgment for, it just vanished. You know, I felt it just went, and it stayed with me for a while and all that. So it still is, the peace is still here. I guess my question is that I sort of felt that on the opposite side of, it was love on the opposite side of fear.
Yeah.
But at the same, I mean, I'm not going to be saying but and all, but it's, the fear is still here. I'm not saying the fear is gone completely. I mean, maybe the doctor will call me tomorrow and say, you know, you may need to do these tests, and this is the result and all, and the fear will come back. I don't know how intensely and how not. So my question, I guess, is fear and love. Love, you know, you've spoken about a lot. And even now, prior to me talking to you, you answered these questions and we pretty much covered the love side. Although now I can see it's the two sides of the same coin, so to
Mhm.
speak. Could you talk about fear? This fear has been with me forever.
Yeah. It's
Yeah.
it is when we are our awakening suddenly, for myself, it just seemed to suddenly become urgent. You know, there wasn't any particular thing I did the other day, that day, rather, that I hadn't done before, but suddenly everything just felt like it got switched up. And as you said before at the start, it was suddenly like, okay, this isn't something I'm pursuing now. This is happening, whether I like it or not. And with that comes pretty much everything that we've been avoiding looking at and understanding, and really everything that we've been avoiding loving and accepting. Because when fear has come up in the past, we've tended to handle it from the egoic perspective, which is to try to push it away. Our ego works on the assumption that if I push against something, excuse me, if I push against it, it will go away. And it really feels that situation works, because it might disappear temporarily, but it's going to come back at some point. And as the self, the opposite is true. So the more that this fear comes up, the more I can accept it and understand it, like we were saying about ego. If I can want to understand this fear, what is it about? At the same time, I can really notice that something in me wants it to go away. You know, so I can have both of those responses. And because you're starting to allow that love that is the real you to flow through, this fear has come up. The fear just wants to be in the love too, just like you do, doesn't it? And it's asking, okay, can I come in too? And when we begin to be able to feel this fear, it can come quite strongly at some particular times, and you've obviously had a situation happen in your life that will remind you of that fear, but it's always been there, just waiting for this kind of acceptance, hasn't it? Fear is going to be present for everyone, whether we're conscious of it or not. As a separate being, there is a whole universe of other things out there that can hurt me, that can harm me, that can threaten me. There is an end to my existence as a separate being that's going to happen at some point, and I am completely out of control of that as a separate being. These beliefs have seemed really real to us, haven't they? And then because of that, there's this great amount of fear that we have, that we can't deal with until we've seen the truth, that loving, compassionate self that doesn't die and that is the source of all things. And just wanting to understand the fear. What am I scared? What's the fear about? Firstly, I feel I'm going to disappear as a separate being, but also everything that I hold dear to me as a separate being, of course, including my own children. And suddenly there's it seems threatened that their existence isn't as certain as we were sure of, and this is going to bring up a lot of fear because everything that I use to build my self identity as a separate being is based on things like that. Well, I'm a mother, I'm a sister, I'm a nurse, I'm a seeker, I'm a wife, or we all have these different ways of defining ourselves. So when this identity is threatened somehow, then there's going to be this fear, isn't there, coming up? And right
Yeah,
now,
and
in particular, this particular part of your identity is being challenged. As a mother, I mean.
yeah, I can see that. I mean, that is obviously it is bringing all the small and big fears also on the
Yeah,
surface, and I know that these are all old fears, and it's based on identity. I can very clearly see that, and I'm thankful to an extent. It is
yeah,
I am thankful when I look at it from the other angle. I see that it is coming up, and I've never thought that this is another part of it in a way that I need to see it or allow it to an extent or to understand it. I'd
yeah,
never gone in that direction. But now either I'm compelled or I've listened from here and there also that this is the way to go. I was listening to Rupert also, so long ago he
yeah,
mentions that there are two ways of doing either you go into it, but I never understood what he meant really. So this time it's happening as if by itself. So
yeah.
that's a
If,
that's a
if we
good
can,
thing.
um, none of us want to feel fear because we've had experiences of being overwhelmed by it in the past. But being overwhelmed by it is only possible when we're pushing against it. We can only be a someone pushing against it. We'll be someone being overwhelmed by it. But if we are the space in which the fear is arising, space in which the body is arising and the fear is being felt in the body, then the fear is not happening to me, it's happening inside me. And that can be a very huge difference in how we can deal with fear. It's impossible to really feel and embrace fear as a separate being because the belief that's perpetuating the fear is true still for us then. Fear says, I'm not safe, I'm in danger. That's the real feeling behind fear. And as a separate being, there is so many other things that we can't control, so as you really sort of try to make friends with it, you don't have to like fear, but as you try to understand it like the self would do, the self, what's this really about? You'll begin to see it's this fear of otherness. That the moment that the sense of two was born, I'm here and everything else is outside of me, separate to me, that this otherness appeared that wasn't there before. So only appeared to be. So as you begin to understand fear, that as this belief in otherness, other beings, other things that can hurt me, and other beings that I can lose, that's the basis of grief, isn't it? There's other beings that I rely upon for my happiness and my self-identity. And when I lose them, I won't be me anymore somehow. I'll have lost something fundamental. So all of this fear is based on this belief in separation. And as soon as I believe that I'm a separate being, this sudden concept of other comes to where there wasn't before. And as you really, I suggest just taking some time to really sit with what we said today, you and I, and just kind of really, love would want to understand this fear. What's the cause of fear? What's the way to heal it? Just kind of those open questions with it. Can I really lose another being if they are me as well? That one was so helpful for me. Are there really any other beings for me to lose or gain? Whichever we're looking for. Does that give you
Actually,
some way to go with it, some direction?
yes, definitely, definitely.
Good.
It's because it's physical. I feel it in
Yeah.
my gut. I feel it in my body everywhere. It's here. It's allowed, but I can see, as you said, it's not really to sort of sit with it or allow it a lot more. It's happening by itself. What is happening,
Yeah.
but I don't see things happening inside me, or I'm one with it. I have not experienced that ever. There are, you know, there's peace, there's, like as I said, love I experienced recently, and other things and trickling like small doses I get here and there. But I don't see myself as this being and everything is happening within me. I've never experienced that.
This is literally what we're talking about here, is literally how to love, to live like that, love like that as well. But when fear arises, some part of me is going to reject it, but I can also, or want to reject it, I can also cultivate in that moment, what would love do with this fear? What does the self want to, what does silence do with fear? And silence listens equally to fear as it does to bliss, doesn't it? It doesn't have these um, responses that ego does, which is to push against something or grab a hold. That's what. So,
Yeah,
right with the pushing against going on, of course, you're not going to like fear. Of course, you want it to go. But while it's here, can we really start to understand it? What is this about actually? And that is literally how we've recognized ourselves to whatever degree as the self. That's literally how the self wants to begin to move outwards into your life. First, it starts with your emotions, your beliefs. Then it'll start, go through your body. Then it'll go through your relationships and transform those. And then your whole world, if you let it. And it's starting with your emotions right now, isn't it? To heal, to resolve, to clear up what was not possible to do as a separate being. And that's what's starting for you now as you're feeling.
yeah, perfect. Thank you
Lovely.
so much. Thanks a
Thank you. Lovely. Good to talk to you.
lot.
Thank you.
Yeah, bye.
Vidya, when you're ready.
Yeah. Hi, Helen.
Hi.
Yeah, just a lot is coming up very quickly. Not really any suffering in it, but unless I still hold to that belief, and then uh, it just happens so quickly that it's seen,
Yeah.
and um, then it's just sort of funny. So there's this frustration in this excitement, and it seems to just be happening on its own. But I remember you saying that it just happens more and more, and maybe it did before, but I didn't recognize it. Where now I'm just recognizing any belief that's popping up that doesn't feel aligned with that truth.
Yeah.
Like Savita and I have some different views, and we go into trying to, you know, look at our view as push a point. It's just happening so quickly. So there's frustration, and then we see it, and it's excitement in the frustration. So we're both able to support each other a lot, um, looking at the beliefs. So it's just really, really exciting. Um,
And when
and
these things happen, more and more, it becomes a positive thing, because it starts off looking like a negative thing, but it becomes an opportunity to love more, doesn't it? To understand more, to really go deeper. And it's possible to eventually get excited like that when something happens, when some little conflict or something starts, something doesn't go the way you want or something like that, and there's just a little friction, and it's like, oh, something's going to open up here. What's that's the deepening literally occurring, in the embodiment of this awakening deepening right there in that moment. And it can be something that you actually begin to look forward to. Not that you're looking for trouble, but life will give you plenty of opportunities, right? It's especially in a close relationship like that. It's just a different way that you're handling it, isn't it? Rather than there might be the initial, why is this happening again? But then there's there must be something about to emerge from this, some seeing or some deepening or revelation or something.
Yeah, and it can be old stuff that hasn't come up for a long, long time, and it's like, why has that popped up? But now I'm recognizing if whatever's showing in my experience is trying to tell me something.
Mm-hmm.
So it's just that's what I really understood is, we're excited today saying this is really living as that. This is what life is living that question and looking and like you said, not finding, but while the belief is there and the reflection is there, is to really it's just really beautiful, and not being able to I just saw the other day how simple it was, or it is, not even was, it is to just I don't know, I can't put it into words, but just so simple.
It just becomes more and more opportunity to to love, doesn't it? Just yesterday, or this morning rather, there was, all the days are melting into one, sorry, there was an epiphany I had. I can't remember what it was about now, but it was like, oh yeah, whereas, and it just came effortlessly, whereas before that would have been hard fought and won, and would have been a lot of suffering and resisting before that, in a particular area. And oh yeah, that's so this little bit of friction happens, and then you begin to see something doesn't quite go how you want. You begin to say, okay, something's about to reveal itself here. And that's what's always been occurring, isn't it? We just didn't really have the ability to see that if we're judging, or that the fact that this friction's occurring means I'm doing something wrong. I'm not awakened enough yet or something. But this is literally in this moment, the awakening embodying itself in that small moment. It's like 1,000 moments like that, isn't it? That just, you really begin to live as that. Like, what does this want to show me? What is this revealing to me?
Yeah, and in the openness, it's a totally different seeing, that it was like, oh, I didn't. Yeah, that's never been true. Yeah.
Wonderful.
Thank you for everything.
Thank you. Lovely.
Beautiful.
Wonderful. Okay. Last but not least is Jay. Whenever you're ready.
Hi, Helen.
Hi. How are you doing?
Good, thanks. So 3 of the core beliefs you mentioned in Satsang was, I can't get everything that I want.
Mm-hmm.
I'm not worthy, and I'm not safe. So once you sort of start getting a handle on those, and you begin to live life with a lessening or diminishing or an absence of those beliefs, and abide and deepen into it, then does getting everything you want in life, or say creating the life that you want whilst understanding that you are not the doer, does it become a balance between creating and allowing at the same time?
Yeah, it's excuse me. What we've really wanted more than anything is to feel a certain way, so I might think that I want a better house, but that may be because it makes me feel more secure, or more money because it gives me a sense of freedom, or whatever it is. What we're really looking for is that sense of authenticity, isn't it? However we're trying to get that is really what we're after, to feel a certain way. So the first, as we start to move beyond these beliefs, we start to experience getting what we want in an internal way. There isn't really internal, external, but for just sake of explanation, as I'm sure you know, I begin to feel more peace, a contentment, a joy, that begins to become more prevalent than the fear. Gradually, this dimmer switch is changing more and more. I tend to react to something as the self and less as the ego, that kind of switch is going on. And that's really what I wanted first and foremost. And then my outer world reflects that back to me, because it really is all me. It's, I'm everywhere all the time. So my outer world is always reflecting what I really feel convinced of in some way. And as I begin to see clearly and experience the fruits of that inside, then that it has to reflect outside, doesn't it? And one of the strangest things I've ever experienced was having to really begin to accept that my life was already a lot better than I was seeing. Like a lot of things I was wanting, like more respect and more sorry, just give me 1 second. Continue with your question there, Jay.
Yes, I think you were saying something about.
But we were talking about balance, weren't you? And yeah, does that help you to kind of naturally what you've wanted first and foremost is to feel a certain way, isn't it?
Yes.
And as you begin to feel that more, your experiences have to begin to agree with that, which ends up looking like what you wanted it to look like anyway. Your life, the things that we've wanted.
Yes, it is kind of like what you were saying before the knock, that you realize that your life is actually better than what you thought it was, or that you actually might have a lot of the things you thought you wanted, etc. But it brings to mind another thing you were saying about awakening in an earlier satsang to someone's question, where if things were intensifying more, and you said it might be an indication of how you were progressing, so to speak, in your awakening, because it seems like the key person who triggers the beliefs you had about being unworthy or not safe or whatever, the more you sort of become more abiding in the self, it seems to intensify that person's behavior towards you in creating earlier beliefs about that. So when does that hellish period end? If you think you've stopped holding those beliefs, although it seems to excavate different angles of that belief in a way at times.
Yeah.
So I'm like, okay, this might be a good sign, but when does this actually go away? Because it can be very tumultuous.
It's a very difficult time, isn't it? A very difficult period. And it really, I remember certain situations in my life getting very, very intense and going total opposite to the way my awakening seemed to be going. The deeper, the more peace I felt, the worse these situations became. And when I really looked at what that was, obviously there's some belief that I was still believing in that particular area. And as we talked about already, as you begin to contemplate these beliefs and start to see them playing out, usually when they're getting worse still, it's because we are still giving power to that belief, but not in the way that we were. So let's say a particular relationship makes me feel unworthy, as an example. At first, I push against that because I believe it's true, that I'm not good enough, etc. And then as I begin to see what I am really and then question this belief, I can come to see it's never been true, that I've been unworthy. Therefore, our first response normally is to push against that egoic belief. Okay, I've seen it's not true now. It should just go away. It should disappear. From this idea that it has to be one or the other. The ego is comparing two things. Is this belief true or not? And it says, well, it's not true. And we begin to push again subtly. There might always be this third stage is where we're kind of not agreeing with the belief, but we're also not pushing it away either. We've seen clearly it's not true, but if I believe it is, it's going to keep playing out here. But I might still be subtly pushing against it, expecting it to go. Can you get a sense of what I'm talking about?
Yes, very much so.
Yeah. So it's just a little final step, okay, to say, I'll let you be there, ego, egoic belief, and I can see you play, but I'm not going to identify with you. I'm also not going to push against you, because this is how this is how love is. Silence allows any belief to play, doesn't it? It doesn't agree with it. It doesn't agree with any belief. It also doesn't push against them. And usually when we check, we're just ever so slightly pushing against these things because we've seen they're not true and we want them to go away. But that's very slight pushing against is enough to sustain it. It's just a little resistance, but it goes a long way. A little bit of resistance is experienced in quite a big way. The more your awakening is deepened. So you can sort of look at it from the self. The self doesn't really actually care whether this belief is still there or not, because it can't believe it and it also can't push against it.
Yes,
Just a little twist on it into now.
Right, because when it actually, though, that say an episode happens, I'm now at that sort of whatever kind of stage. Like, just it's not even like I don't even think of like this isn't true. I don't hold that belief. It's just like, yeah, whatever. Just
here's this old movie again
involved.
playing.
Yeah, exactly. I'm not involved. I'm just unruffled and wait for it to be over so I can go about my business.
Yeah.
Thank goodness, because I don't know. You have to go through that that storm, I guess, before you come out of it. Thank you.
Yeah, lovely. It's just a slight difference between, ego says, I love you as long as you go away. And the self says, I love you, to this belief. It's just a slight difference, but it makes a whole world of difference in your experience. So, lovely.
Yes.
Good to talk to you. I'm sorry about the interruption. Lovely. Okay, last but not least, we'll go with Joyce whenever you're ready.
Hi, Helen.
Hi.
I'm just really new to this, and so this might seem so fundamental, but I'm wondering. I can't get the most fundamental thing that it seems like you all have is the sense of like I just feel like a separate being, and I don't know how to unknow that. Like I don't know how to get that. It seems to be a very, very fundamental seeing that I need to see, but I don't know how to see it.
Yeah.
So I wonder if you can give me some pointers or.
The first thing to recognize is, even once you've had a deep seeing of the fact that you're not a separate being, you will always also seem separate. So while the body's here and you're looking through your eyes and listening through your ears, there'll be a sense of being a separate being that's never going to go away till the body goes. And it's not something that's going wrong. It's necessary, isn't it? So you know to feed and look after that body, and you know when it needs to go to work and all that stuff. And it took me a very long time to realize that I didn't have to get rid of the sense of being someone to see what I really am. I was trying to do that for such a long time. So we can do a little self-inquiry now if you like. Dig deeper into it if you want to, if you're up for it. It's always a good time now, isn't it, to do it?
Well, yes, I mean, yes.
So
Okay.
right now, let's just look, and you have a mind and body. There's thoughts, there's a body, isn't there? There's maybe emotions going on, sensations in the body. Maybe your body's hot or cold or anxious or relaxed or whatever it's feeling. And all of that is fine just as it is. Like we said, that's a sense of being someone. But let's just have a look and see if we can actually find a separate being. Just scanning yourself, looking and seeing, not thinking about, just having a look and seeing what you can actually find. It seems like there's a separate being here. But what happens when you actually look at that? And anyone that wants to join in, do this at the same time with us is more than welcome. What do we actually find when we look? Where actually is Joyce, really? There's a mind, there's a body, but where is Joyce?
It seems like I'm in deep suffering. So my suffering seems to be me, and that's separate. That's, yeah.
Okay.
And when I get these really heavy clouds of sorrow and anxiety and fear, all it's just a big ball of wax,
Yeah.
and that just seems to be me. And what, how to, what to do? That does seem separate to out there,
Yeah.
and everybody else.
So let me ask you something that's going to sound really crazy question, but let's go with it anyway. Where does that big ball of wax end? Where does it end? It seems this is me. It seems like this is me. It's like this thing here that is me. Can you actually find edges to it? Are there actually any edges where you can say, if you and I were sat in the same room together, could you say where you end and where I start? There's a feeling, an assumption that there's a dividing line between us somewhere. I just want you to really look and see, how far do you reach from that body? Can you actually find a boundary? It feels like there is, but just looking and seeing, see what we can find. And there is no wrong way to do this. Just this looking like this is doing something very, very powerful. Very powerful. If we assume, because it really feels like I'm here, I'm only here, I'm nowhere else, I'm only here, then we're sustaining this illusion, assumption, we're agreeing with it. Just really wanting to see, it feels like I'm only here, but when I actually look where I end, how far do I reach across the room that I'm sitting in? It becomes a little less certain, a little less. So what you're experiencing when you ask this question of yourself, what's happening?
Well, I can kind of get the thinning out, like, oh. But it's the actual emotion that sucks me right back into my body.
Yeah, it's okay.
Right? Like,
Yeah.
like pain, like the suffering sucks me right back into my body.
That's okay.
And totally.
Yeah. When I So if you notice that when you focus on emotions and thoughts and sensations, you really feel like a someone somewhere, separate being. And when you actually look, where do I actually end? You begin to feel this thinning out, this realization, very, very, very faint at first, very faint. I don't really actually know that I'm separate. It's a huge assumption that I've had. Okay. And the thing that we all do when we first start to experience this is think, right, okay, then I should suddenly stop feeling like a separate being. But you're going to feel like a separate being for all of your life. There's nothing wrong with that. Just like a sense of suffering pulls you back into this feeling separate, eventually a sense of joy is going to be felt in the body and peace and all of that. So, not trying to get rid of the sense of being someone. It's okay if attention goes back to that. Doesn't matter. Just every now and again, gently asking this question. For me, the question, where am I? Or how far do I reach actually? And just looking was so powerful to begin to undo this assumption. The more times I ask this question and experience, I don't really actually know that I have a boundary as a separate being. It's something I've always agreed with. And it seems that way because I'm having these emotions and thoughts and this anxiety or whatever's going on. You know, it seems that way. So we're just gently undoing that assumption by asking this question more and more. And each time you ask it, that thinning out is going to happen more and more to where we're less, each time you ask that question, you're less able to believe you're a separate being, right? Doesn't mean the sense of being someone is going to disappear, because that's the software program like you have on your computer, software for your mind and body. And you need that to be able to, okay, my body's cold, I'm going to put an extra layer on, or it's hungry, I'm going to feed it, you know, something like that. So play with the question, see which one strikes you. How far do I reach? Or where am I actually? Or can I find an edge to me? Something like that. Whichever one, you know, really, or any of the, I've used a lot of different questions in different satsangs, but don't expect it to be one or the other. For a long time, it's going to be both. Okay. And that's okay. And gradually, as you ask this question, like we've just done today, the sense of being, of having no edges, not being able to find where you end, is going to gradually become louder than the sense of this big ball of wax. Right? And every time you ask the question, you're just turning up this dimmer switch on what you really know yourself to be. It's a gradual process, the change of most of us. Most of us never really ask this question because the assumption is that I do, because I feel separate, I must be separate. But in the end, we want to really confirm that with clarity. And when we actually look where I end, you know, can't actually really say, and it's enough to be honest and say, didn't actually manage to find an edge to me. I've always kind of assumed myself to be this entity around the body, you know, something like that, to have a shape. Yeah. And what we've done today, just now, this looking, that thinning out, that's enough. That will just become more and more clear every time you look.
Yeah. Okay. I needed that encouragement. I thought, you know, fundamentally, if I couldn't get it, because I hear what you say, but I couldn't really get it.
Yeah.
Okay, so just keep at it. Okay, thank you.
Yeah, and don't fight against the sense of being someone. That doesn't need to go away, and it certainly won't go away anytime soon, because for a while it's going to seem like both. I might begin to recognize I'm not really a thing. I don't really have any edges. And I also feel like someone and something at the same time. And that's confusing to mind, but from your perspective, it's possible. Like right now, I know that I'm everywhere and that I have no edges and that there's nothing outside of me. That's obvious and clear to me because I've done what we've just done so many times. And I also feel like someone talking to you. And they're not in conflict, you see. They're just natural complement to each other. So you're doing it right on track. You really are.
Oh, thank you. Thank you so much.
You're very, very welcome. Good to talk to you. You take care. Okay, so we'll leave the satsang there for today. Thank you for joining me. Namaste.
Namaste. Thank you, everybody.
Thank you.